Are you making this mistake when you're dehydrating food?
Hi folks, it's Darcy from the Purposeful and know the number one mistake that most dehydrators make is not doing their drying in the closet. It is relying too much on a timer. So the timer that's on your machine is going to tell you that the time has stopped. It's going to turn off your machine and it just tells you that time is up. Okay, it doesn't affect the drying time of your machine at all. Well, I'm going to take that back. It does affect it the longer that you dry, the more things dry out. Okay, that's not the issue. It's that if you rely simply on the timer to tell you things are done, that's not going to be an effective way to dry. What I find is that most people don't stop dehydrating because they can't figure out how to use their foods. Most people stop dehydrating because they don't understand why their foods don't work. And so they give up and they're like, well, if I can't ever get my apple chips crisp, why am I doing this? Or I keep drying things and then I put them on the shelf and they keep molding, or they're so soft when I pull them out, I don't understand. And it's not always because of storage. It's not always because of preconceived notions. It's because they rely on those times that the recipe that they follow told them it should be done, and rarely does that really work. So if you're new to dehydrating, this is the one thing that you really need to pay attention to. Things are going to be dry when they're dry, not when the timer tells you it's done. So let's talk about those 6 factors that affect your drying time. Number 1 is your home's humidity. Your home's humidity is how much moisture is in the air. If you live in a house that is in a tropical climate and you don't have an air conditioner, you're going to be humid no matter what. The humidity outside is going to be inside your house. It's going to be humid. So how dehydrating works is that it blows warm air over your food, and that warm air takes the moisture out of your food and puts it into the air. If the air inside your home is already very humid, it's going to take longer for that moisture to transfer. It's just going to take longer. So you use those windows of time that you're told in a recipe and just go, okay, I'll check at this point, and if it's not dry, I continue to dry, and that's fine. That's what you have to do, because things will be dry when they're dry, not a minute sooner, and not when a book tells you it's finished. So if you live in a house that has air conditioning naturally draws out the moisture. If you happen to live in a house with a swamp coolers put in the moisture. And thank you for somebody who told me about that last week. I never thought about swamp coolers, for those of you who live in the desert area. If you live in a dry, humid climate, your things might dry faster than the books say, because the time is for those optimal projects, not necessarily the every kind of condition. So know that if you live in a humid climate and you don't have AC, then your projects may take a little longer than what the books recommend, and just dry a little longer. Another factor is going to be your machine, and that's twofold. How your machine is built, whether you have a stackable or whether you have a cabinet, that style affects how your food dries. A cabinet style machine tends to be more efficient as far as because it's drying across your food all the time. A stackable tends to be a little less efficient because it's coming from one direction, either top or bottom, and it has to go through all the food as opposed to going across all the food. The other factor is the wattage of your machine. So if you have a machine that's 450 watts versus a machine that's 1,000 watts, that also can affect the drying time, because it's how much air gets pushed across versus the direction that it's going. So if you have a stackable like a Nesco that's 1,000 watts, it's going to perform better than a cabinet style with only 450 watts. But if you have a stackable, which most stackables are from 600 watts down, they're going to perform less efficiently than a cabinet style, which tend to be 600 watts and up. That's not across the board, but that's the tendency is how they make those. So don't fret if you have a low wattage stackable machine. Just know that it's going to take you longer to dry things than that recommended time window that you will see in recipes. Give yourself a break. Just keep drying, okay? How you prepare your food is also a factor in how long something will take to dry. There are a couple of things that play into this. When you have vegetables that require being blanched, not only does that stop the enzymatic process that makes your food go bad on the shelf in storage, it also helps retain some vitamins in some foods. The other thing is that it also helps break down fibers, so that things that might be really fibrous will take less time to dry when some of that has been broken down than if you put it in raw. It doesn't always work that way, but that's one of the factors that can play into it. But the bigger factor is how you pre-treat fruit. because some fruits need to have some things done to them to help them dry. So what do you do with those fruits? You pre-treat them. You break the skin somehow, whether you slice the skin, whether you poke holes in it, whether you blanch it, because that will break the skin, and it's recommended for things like cranberries. Whether you freeze it for a good hard freeze, not just like 10 minutes, I mean, not like 4 hours, that's what I meant, not 4 hours, but you need to really good hard freeze it to break those cells. And then as they dry, they tend the skin tends to break. You need to do those things to make those dry more efficiently, because it allows the the moisture to escape out of the fruit. It's that pre-treatment of how you do your food that matters how efficiently it dries. Another factor is how you pack your trays. A tray that is packed full of food has less air circulation, so it can't move the moisture out because the air can't get to everything and it takes so much longer to dry than if you have a tray that has all of the foods kind of laid out and has a little bit of space between. That matters more the denser your food is, and the less it shrinks when it dries. It matters the most compared to if you do something like herbs or spinach and kale, which tend to shrink really quickly and a lot. You can pack those on a little more, and as they shrink down, they will start making airspace, and you can kind of just go through there and mush it up and create a little bit more airspace, and that will help it dry faster. So those things that are dense, that are very wet, you need to give them some space. Just give them some space. They'll dry faster that way. So the moisture level of your food also affects the drying time. If you pick a tomato first thing in the morning and like maybe an hour after you've watered the garden and it's been allowed to absorb all that moisture, it's going to take longer to dry that tomato than one that you pick in the afternoon when it's had a little time to release some of the moisture and has a more concentrated flavor. That will take less time to dry than the morning tomato, because this one's holding so much more moisture. It also will affect things that when you wash them and you don't let them dry, don't pat them dry, or don't give them some time to dry in a towel, like herbs. If you put them on pretty wet, they're going to take a whole lot longer to dry than if you allow them some time to just air dry or pat them dry before you put them in the machine. They will take less time to dry that way. So the temperature that you set your machine affects your drying time as well. Temperatures are recommended by the National Center for Home Food Preservation to be a good balance between efficiency and saving nutrients, okay? But the manual in your machine may suggest different times, and most often in a lot of those machines, those times are too hot. Or like I do, I might suggest that some things dry lower, at a lower temperature. You're saving more nutrients, you're saving sugars from browning too quickly, you're saving the flavor. Like herbs should never be dried at 150 because you lose so much flavor from those and you run the risk of actually burning those. The temperature you set it at affects the time that you dry. So let's say that you're going to dry apple slices. No, let's do zucchini chips, because this is one thing that I see that we run into. Okay, the recommended time for doing a zucchini chip is 125 F 52C. Okay, that is the optimal time. Now, if you're wanting something that's like a potato chip, I do recommend that you increase that temperature a little bit, because you want it to crisp up. You want it to dry a little faster. You want to get that air out quickly. You want it to to crisp up some. However, if you're doing a zucchini chip a little thicker for storage, like you're getting that ready to go into storage so that you can use it later in soups and stews during the winter, you're not looking for that kind of crisp texture for a chip. You're looking for it to dry thoroughly. So, dry it at the recommended time. But then there are those folks who like to keep a raw food diet. So they like to eat their food raw, or they like to save as many nutrients as they possibly can in the preservation time so that they can do with it what they wish in the end. Now, granted, when you cook things, you're going to lose these same nutrients no matter what. So that's if you're on the cooking scale, make your decision about where you want to save the nutrients. So they will dry at anything from 115 F, and then let's see, and double check what that is because I never remember this one, 46C and down. Because at that point, the lower you dry, the more nutrients in general that you save over time, and it's usually vitamin C and vitamin A. Those are the ones that are really heat sensitive. And so when you dry at lower temperatures than are recommended, things take longer to dry. They just do, because you're not running as much heat to kind of dissipate that moisture, so it just takes longer. So if you're opting to keep a raw food diet, or you just want to keep more of the flavor in things, you want to make sure that you give yourself time, because you're going to need more time. Okay, so let's say that based on all of that information, I decided to prep something by the recipe that I found on the Purposeful Pantry. It said things should be done within 4 to 6 hours. So, okay, I'm gonna prep that. I'm gonna get it ready. I'm just gonna throw stuff on. I have a stackable machine that's 350 watts. My home is pretty humid because I live in South Florida and I don't have great air conditioning, and it'll be done by the time I go to bed, and then I can go to bed. And what happens when you're still sitting there an hour after you're supposed to go to bed and it's not done yet? What can you do? There are two things, okay? You can put that food back into your refrigerator, let it sit there until such time you can start your machine again. Maybe you work from the house. You work away from the house and you can't put things back in till you get home the next day. Keep it in your refrigerator, because Safe Food Handling doesn't want you to leave food out that's not, that just is exposed to air all that time when it's been cut, and you can just get whatever stuff is in your air settling on your food. Or just let your machine run overnight. Yes, there is a small fire hazard, as there is with any appliance that you keep plugged in and running, no matter what it is in your home. So you have to make that choice. I always let my machine run overnight because no project is ever done in the time it's supposed to be done, and I'm not staying up to babysit. So the very last issue that you might have and how long things take to dry is the relative position of Saturn to the planet Xanadu. And yeah, that sounds a little woo-woo, but sometimes woo-woo kind of affects your, the way things dry. Sometimes you just don't know why things aren't drying the way they're supposed to. You've done everything right. You've prepped it. You've got you've done the things that you're supposed to do before it starts. You've got your machine running correctly. Everything's supposed to be working, and it still isn't drying as fast as you want. Here's the mantra. It's dry when it's dry. You just have to be patient. Patience is the bane of the dehydrating world, because we want our things to get dry so that we can move on to the next project going through. We want to snack on the food. We want to do all those things, and it's just not going to come out as fast as we want. And that's just the way it is. You just have to be patient. Really, patience is key to everything. Now, can you dry things and not dry them as long as they need to be dried? For snacking, of course. If you want to dry things and they're not quite dry, but you like that texture, that's fine. Let them be done. If they're not fully dry, make sure you store them in the refrigerator, because that can develop mold because it's not fully dry. So know that you're going to need to eat that within a week or two in the refrigerator. It'll be fine. If the things that you want to store are not crispy dry, then you need to dry it longer. That's just the way it is. And if you want to know how I make chips that taste like potato chips, learn how to do it right here. Watch this video. And until I see you again next time, happy dehydrating.